Society of the Snow is a survival thriller about the true story of the Uruguayan 1972 Andes flight disaster. In this movie, we follow the survivors of a plane crash that went down going from Uruguay to Chile, leaving them stranded in the snowy Andes Mountains. The crash immediately killed 12 of the 45 on board, with more to suffer the same fate due to lack of medical attention and the severe conditions. The survivors are put to the ultimate test, being forced to do what they can to survive the freezing temperatures while they await rescue. The core theme of this movie is unity. We watch these survivors show undying support for one another while going through absolute hell on earth. It's really nice watching a survival movie that isn't just another dog-eat-dog story and is mostly driven by love and compassion. Among these survivors are members of the old Christian club rugby team, so a lot of them were already pretty well acquainted, giving them a strong sense of fellowship from the get-go. Their faith in one another is so strong that it almost feels old-fashioned. When you see how selfish and inconsiderate people nowadays act under much less dire circumstances, you can't help but think that it was perhaps just because of how different people generally were 50 years ago. Or perhaps that was just the result of the dramatization of the story. Maybe they were all total pieces of crap. So in order to survive, these folks have to do a lot for each other, but when the food runs out, they do clash a little bit over what they should do next. And the things that some of them resort to eating at first are hard to watch. But of course that checks out. Most people will resort to eating anything that the stomach would digest when the alternative is death. It's a very dark and sad movie, but there are some brighter spots which saved it from being totally depressing. There are moments where the characters try and be cheerful and talkative. There's a wonderful scene in this movie where one of them is talking about his faith in God, and then the other responds by talking about his faith in his comrades. It's moments like these that really solidify the movie's core theme of unity, despite seemingly always leading into more tragic moments. There were a couple stylistic depictions of the deadly conditions some of them were faced with. For an example, there are scenes where characters are buried under snow, but what we see on screen is the character drowning or trapped in ice, acting as a visual metaphor for what they're actually going through. These bits were cool, but again, it was only really a couple times. I think that maybe adding more of these could have contributed to a more unique directorial style. So this movie is narrated by one Numa Turcati, but I am reluctant to say that he was the main character. There were so many characters that proved to be big players, some of whom ended up having a lot more agency than him. I'm a little confused as to why he was the narrator, honestly. He's a solid character, but it arguably would have made more sense to have one of the other big players as the main. I think that the character Roberto Canessa, who served as one of the doctors, would have been a much more feasible protagonist. Nevertheless, these narrations were very necessary. I think that they helped carry the movie through parts of the movie that otherwise would have felt a little bit dry. That said, the movie did still drag its feet through some of the second act. There are a lot of jumps through time, theoretically skipping over a lot of hard and emotional moments for these characters. Perhaps there could have just been more / bigger jumps through time because it ran a little bit long. At one point during the second act, things were getting a little bit sluggish, and I checked the time and realized I still got a whole hour left. The third act does deliver a satisfying conclusion though, so it's not a total feet dragger overall. I also gotta say that I'm really glad that I saw this at the theater because that plane crash, oh my God. Everything just hits harder on the big screen, and that scene was unforgettable. This movie really puts things into perspective, more so than other survival movies, considering the fact that it's based on a true story. You can't help but think how you would handle being in this very terrifying situation. I'm sure a lot of people like to think that they would play it cool, but you really never know. In Western civilization, we're so sheltered and cozy. With how many people didn't handle being locked in their homes very well in 2020, it's hard to imagine being trapped in the freezing cold for months with people that you don't really know if you can trust. I think movies like this should just remind us not to take the little things in life for granted. Overall, it's a compelling and harrowing glance at what the survivors of this tragedy fought through. It's a good watch. It does have its tiresome moments, but it's still solid, and it is one that you might need tissues for. If you're in the mood for a powerful story or one that is based on a true story, then look no further. But if you're in the mood for something with more character conflicts, then maybe consider something else. Thank you for watching this review. If it brought you any value at all, please consider giving it a like. It really does help the channel grow. I'll see you next week with my reviews of Lift and the Book of Clarence.